Part 1. Early Life, Family, and the Beginning of a Business Journey. Have you ever wondered how a person can move through completely different worlds during one lifetime? Imagine growing up in New York, learning about business from your family, entering the world of real estate, becoming a well-known public figure, and eventually becoming President of the United States. The story of Donald Trump is filled with business, television, politics, success, controversy, difficult moments, and major changes. In this Graded Reader podcast, we are going to follow his life in simple English, step by step, while learning useful vocabulary and expressions along the way. This is not a story about one perfect person or a perfect journey. It is the story of a public figure whose life has included both achievements and serious challenges, and whose career has attracted strong supporters as well as strong critics. The goal of this episode is to understand the major events of his life, while improving your English naturally through storytelling. Donald John Trump was born in New York City in 1946. He grew up in a family connected to the real estate business, which means his early environment was already connected to buildings, property, money, and business decisions. His father, Fred Trump, was a real estate developer who built homes and apartments in New York. From a young age, Donald was therefore exposed to the language and world of business. Instead of seeing business as something completely distant, he saw it as part of everyday family life. This early experience would later influence the direction of his career. The White House biography also notes his education at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School and his later move into real estate development in New York City. After finishing university, Trump entered the family real estate business. At this point, his main interest was not politics or television. His attention was focused on buildings and development. The word development in business can mean creating or improving property, such as buildings, offices, hotels, or other real estate projects. Trump wanted to move beyond the areas where his father had mainly worked and become involved in larger projects in Manhattan. Manhattan was an important part of New York City, and it was already famous for its tall buildings, busy streets, hotels, offices, and strong business culture. For Trump, moving into Manhattan meant entering a highly competitive environment where many people were trying to build successful careers. He wanted his name and his projects to become visible in that world. One of the important lessons English learners can take from this part of the story is the meaning of the word opportunity. An opportunity is a situation that gives you a chance to do something useful or important. When Trump entered the Manhattan real estate market, he saw opportunities in properties that other people might have considered difficult or risky. Whether people agree with his decisions or not, his career shows how important it can be to recognize opportunities and make decisions when the future is uncertain. In everyday English, you might say, "I saw an opportunity to improve my English," or "She found an opportunity to start a new career." These sentences show how the word can be used naturally. During the 1970s and 1980s, Trump became increasingly visible in New York's business and real estate world. He became associated with large development projects and with the Trump name appearing on buildings and properties. One of the most famous projects connected with him was Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. The building became an important symbol of his public image and business brand. A brand is the name, image, or identity connected with a company, product, or person. Trump understood that his name itself could become part of his business identity. This idea would become even more important later when he moved into television and entertainment. But building a public image also brought greater attention, and attention can have both advantages and disadvantages. When more people know your name, more people watch what you do. Success can create opportunities, but it can also create pressure. Business decisions can be praised by some people and criticized by others. Trump experienced both sides throughout his career. His public life became increasingly connected with his personality, his communication style, and his ability to attract attention. This would eventually help him enter a completely different industry, television. Before we move into that part of the story, it is useful to understand another important word: ambitious. If someone is ambitious, it means they strongly want to achieve something important and are willing to work toward a large goal. Trump became known as an ambitious businessman who wanted to build large projects and create a recognizable name. Ambition can be useful because it encourages people to set large goals. But ambition also needs planning, discipline, and the ability to deal with failure. A person can have a big dream, but the dream alone is not enough. There must also be action. As Trump's business career developed, he also became a familiar face in American popular culture. His name appeared in newspapers and magazines, and he became known not only as a businessman, but also as a celebrity. This was unusual, because many business owners remained mostly behind the scenes. Trump, however, became part of the story himself. His personality was connected with his businesses, and the public became interested in his lifestyle, his opinions, and his projects. This growing public attention would later become one of the most important parts of his journey. Then came a major change. In 2004, Trump became the host and central figure of the reality television program The Apprentice. The show introduced him to millions of television viewers and made his business persona even more recognizable. For many people who had never followed New York real estate, television became their introduction to Donald Trump. The program also helped strengthen his image as a businessman and public personality. His television career was important because it gave him something that would later become extremely valuable in politics: national name recognition. The phrase name recognition means that many people already know who someone is. Imagine a person entering an election without anyone knowing their name. That person must first introduce themselves to the public. Trump had a different situation. By the time he entered presidential politics, millions of Americans already knew him from television, business news, books, and public appearances. This does not automatically mean that people supported him, but it meant that he was already familiar to a large audience. His first major book, The Art of the Deal, became widely known and contributed to his public image as a businessman. The White House biography describes it as his first book and calls it a business classic. For English learners, the word deal is especially useful because it has several meanings. In business, a deal is an agreement between people or companies. For example, you can say, "The two companies made a deal." In everyday conversation, someone might say, "That sounds like a good deal," meaning that something is a good offer or arrangement. As the years passed, Trump's public identity continued to grow. He was no longer known only in New York. His name had become recognized across the United States. Yet his biggest transformation had not happened yet. The businessman and television personality would eventually make a decision that surprised many people. He would enter presidential politics. This is where the story becomes even more interesting, because entering politics meant entering a completely different world. Business decisions are often made inside companies, while political decisions affect millions of people and involve elections, laws, public debate, and government institutions. A business person can decide what project to build, but a president must work within a constitutional system and with Congress, courts, states, government agencies, and the public. The White House explains that the president is both head of state and head of government and has responsibilities that include implementing federal laws and leading the executive branch. In 2015, Trump announced that he was running for president of the United States. His campaign attracted enormous attention. He presented himself as an outsider who was willing to challenge established political habits and speak directly to voters. His style was different from that of many traditional politicians, and his campaign quickly became one of the most talked about political campaigns in the country. Some people were attracted to his message and communication style, while others strongly opposed him. Either way, he had succeeded in doing something extremely important in politics: getting people's attention. The 2016 presidential election became a historic moment in Trump's life. He won the Republican nomination and then defeated Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton in the Electoral College, becoming the 45th President of the United States. He took office in January 2017. The White House identifies him as the 45th and 47th President of the United States. Think about how dramatic this change was. A man who had spent much of his life in real estate and entertainment had entered national politics and reached the highest elected office in the country. His journey had moved from business offices and construction sites to the White House. Yet becoming president did not mean the difficult part of his story was over. In many ways, it was the beginning of an entirely new chapter, one filled with major policy decisions, political disagreements, international issues, public criticism, and constant attention from the media. And this is an important lesson for anyone learning English through stories. A person's life is rarely one simple straight line. People change careers, face unexpected opportunities, experience failures, and sometimes enter completely different worlds. When you learn English through a real-life story, you are not only learning vocabulary, you are also learning how to describe change, challenges, decisions, goals, and experiences. Words such as opportunity, ambitious, development, recognition, challenge, decision, career, and success are useful far beyond this story. You can use them when talking about your own life, your education, your work, or your dreams. Part 2. From Television to the White House. After becoming a familiar face through business and television, Donald Trump entered a completely new chapter of his life. For many years, he had been known mainly as a businessman and television personality, but in 2015 he announced that he would run for President of the United States. His announcement immediately attracted enormous public attention. Some people were excited because they believed he could bring a different style to American politics, while others were concerned about his ideas and communication style. His campaign was very different from a traditional political campaign, and his direct way of speaking became one of its most noticeable features. In politics, the word campaign means the organized effort made by a person who wants to win an election. During a campaign, candidates travel, speak to voters, discuss their ideas, attend events, and try to convince people to support them. Trump's campaign quickly became one of the most discussed campaigns in the United States. He spoke about immigration, jobs, trade, national security, and his desire to change the way Washington worked. His message attracted a large number of supporters, particularly people who believed that traditional politicians had not listened carefully enough to their concerns. At the same time, his words and policies attracted strong criticism from many other people. This created a very divided political environment. The word divided is useful for English learners because it describes a situation where people have very different opinions and do not easily agree. You might say, the group was divided about the decision, meaning some people supported the decision while others opposed it. During the Republican primary process, Trump competed against many other candidates. His strong public presence, television experience, and ability to attract media attention helped him remain highly visible throughout the campaign. Eventually, he won the Republican nomination for president in 2016. The historical White House biography records that he announced his candidacy on June 16, 2015, and accepted the Republican nomination in July 2016 after defeating 17 other contenders in the Republican primaries. The word contender means a person who is competing for something, especially a position, prize, or title. In a competition, several people may be contenders, but only one person can finally win. The presidential election of 2016 became one of the most memorable elections in recent American history. Trump faced Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton. The campaign was intense, and the country watched closely as voters made their decisions. On election night, the results showed that Trump had won the Electoral College and would become the 45th President of the United States. For someone who had spent much of his life in real estate and entertainment, this was an extraordinary change. He had moved from business towers and television studios to the highest elected office in the United States. In January 2017, Donald Trump became president. The transition from businessman to president was not simple. A president has many responsibilities and must work within a large government system. The president is the head of the executive branch, and the executive branch is responsible for carrying out and enforcing federal laws. The president also works with cabinet officials, government agencies, Congress, the courts, state governments, foreign leaders, and many other institutions. This meant that Trump's new job was much more complicated than running a private business or hosting a television program. One of the major themes of Trump's first presidency was immigration. His administration supported stronger border security and changes to immigration policy. Immigration became one of the most important and controversial subjects of his presidency. Supporters believed stronger border controls were necessary for national security and the enforcement of immigration laws. Critics argued that some of his policies were too harsh and created serious humanitarian concerns. This is an important example of why learning about history and politics requires us to understand different perspectives. When people strongly disagree about an issue, it is useful to listen carefully and understand the reasons behind different opinions rather than simply assuming that everyone sees the world in the same way. Another important area was the economy. Trump's administration supported tax cuts, deregulation, and policies intended to encourage business activity. The administration presented these policies as ways to support economic growth, jobs, and investment. The historical White House record describes tax cuts and regulatory changes among the major policies of the first administration. However, economic policies can affect different groups in different ways, and economists, politicians, workers, and businesses often disagree about their long-term effects. For an English learner, the useful word here is impact, which means the effect that something has on a person, group, or situation. You might say, the new policy had a major impact on the economy. Trump's first presidency also included changes in international trade. His administration challenged existing trade relationships and placed significant attention on the United States' relationship with China. The North American Free Trade Agreement, commonly called NAFTA, was replaced by the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. The administration described this as an effort to create a different approach to trade with neighboring countries. The word trade is another useful English word. It means the buying and selling of goods and services between people, companies, or countries. For example, international trade connects many countries around the world. Foreign policy was also a major part of Trump's presidency. His administration dealt with relationships involving countries such as China, Russia, North Korea, and nations in the Middle East. Trump became known for a direct and sometimes unpredictable communication style in international affairs. His approach attracted both supporters and critics. Some supporters believed his willingness to challenge traditional diplomatic methods gave the United States greater negotiating power, while critics worried that his communication style could increase tensions. The word diplomatic means careful and respectful when dealing with sensitive situations, especially between countries. Diplomacy often requires patience because one statement can influence relationships between nations. Another major event during Trump's presidency was the appointment of federal judges, including 2 Supreme Court justices. The federal judiciary plays an important role in interpreting laws and the Constitution, so presidential appointments to the courts can influence American government for many years. The historical White House record notes Trump's appointments of Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. This shows that the effects of a presidency are not limited to the 4 years a president spends in office. Some decisions can continue influencing the country long after an administration has ended. Then, in 2020, the world faced a crisis that changed everyday life for millions of people. The COVID-19 pandemic spread across countries, affecting schools, businesses, hospitals, families, travel, and the global economy. Trump's administration responded with emergency measures, including the launch of Operation Warp Speed, which aimed to accelerate the development and delivery of COVID-19 vaccines. The pandemic became one of the most difficult periods of his presidency, and his response was heavily debated. Supporters pointed to government efforts to develop vaccines and provide financial assistance, while critics questioned various aspects of the administration's handling of the crisis. The year 2020 also brought another presidential election. Trump ran for a second term against Democratic candidate Joe Biden. The election took place during the pandemic, and the result was a victory for Biden. Trump did not accept the result and made claims about election problems. Numerous legal and political disputes followed, making the period after the election one of the most controversial chapters in modern American politics. For English learners, this part of the story introduces the word dispute, which means a serious disagreement or argument between people or groups. A dispute can happen between 2 individuals, 2 companies, or even political groups. In January 2021, Joe Biden was inaugurated as president, and Trump left the White House. At this point, many people might have expected Trump's political career to be finished, but that was not what happened. Instead, he remained an influential figure within the Republican Party and continued speaking to supporters across the country. His political movement remained strong, and he continued to discuss the possibility of returning to the White House. This period demonstrates another important word: comeback. A comeback means returning to a position of success or influence after experiencing a setback or period away. For several years, Trump remained active in American politics. He held rallies, spoke about national issues, and continued to criticize the Biden administration. Eventually, he announced another presidential campaign for the 2024 election. This time, his goal was not simply to become president for the first time. He was trying to return to an office he had already held. That made the campaign historically unusual and personally significant. The 2024 election became another major chapter in Trump's life. He defeated Democratic candidate Kamala Harris and won the Electoral College, returning to the presidency. On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump was sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. The official White House website identifies him as both the 45th and 47th President, and its records confirm that he was sworn in for his second presidency on January 20th, 2025. Think about the journey for a moment. A young man who grew up around the real estate business in New York became a businessman, then a television personality, then a presidential candidate, then the 45th president, then a former president, and later returned to the White House as the 47th president. Whether people admire him or strongly disagree with him, his career is an example of how dramatically a person's life can change over several decades. For English learners, there is another important lesson here. When you study someone's life through a story, you can learn how to describe change. You can say that someone started as a businessman, later became a television personality, entered politics, won an election, left office, and returned to public life. These expressions are useful when talking about your own life too. You might say, I started as a student, later found my first job, learned new skills, changed my career, and eventually started my own business. Learning English becomes easier when you connect vocabulary with real situations instead of memorizing isolated words. And Trump's story does not end with his first years in business or even with his first presidency. His life has continued to develop through politics, business, media, legal battles, public debates, elections, and his return to the White House. In the next part, we will look more closely at the challenges, controversies, and lessons that have shaped his public life, while continuing to learn useful English through the story.